Let's begin. The hardwood floor of Norman Sawyer's modest two-bedroom apartment creaked as he hung purple streamers across the living room. 7 years. His daughter Emma would be 7 today, and he'd promised her the best birthday she'd ever had. It wouldn't be extravagant. His salary as a chemical engineer at a pharmaceutical company paid the bills, but left little for excess, but it would be filled with love. That's what mattered. Emma sat cross-legged on the couch, watching cartoons, her dark curls bouncing as she laughed at something on screen. She had her mother's eyes, warm and brown, and every time Norman looked at her, he saw Allison. 3 years had passed since Allison's death, and the wound still felt fresh some days. "Daddy, when is Grandma coming?" Emma asked, turning to face him. Norman's jaw tightened. Gertrude Sawyer, his mother, the woman who had made the last decade of his life a calculated exercise in endurance. "Soon, sweetheart. Uncle Douglas will bring her." He didn't want Gertrude here. But Emma, innocent and hopeful, still believed family meant something. She didn't understand that some people wore family like a costume, using it to inflict maximum damage from the inside. His phone buzzed. "Douglas, we're 10 minutes out. Fair warning, Mom's in a mood." Norman's brother had been his only ally through everything. Douglas understood what Gertrude was capable of, though even he didn't know the full extent of what Norman had discovered over the past 3 years. Norman walked to his bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of his dresser. Beneath folded sweaters lay a manila envelope, its edges worn from being handled countless times. Inside were documents that represented 3 years of investigation, thousands of hours of research, and the complete unraveling of his mother's carefully constructed lies. He'd been waiting for the right moment. Today, he realized, was that moment. Norman met Allison Wiley in graduate school. She was studying literature while he pursued his engineering doctorate, and they collided literally in the campus coffee shop when she'd backed into him while arguing with the barista about the difference between a macchiato and a latte. Her coffee had splashed across his research notes, and instead of being angry, he'd laughed. She'd bought him a replacement coffee and asked to see his notes. "Chemistry," she'd said, squinting at his equations. "It looks like poetry to really insane people." They were married within 2 years. Gertrude hated Allison from the first introduction. Norman remembered that dinner vividly. Allison had worn a simple blue dress, brought homemade cookies, and genuinely tried to connect with his mother. Gertrude had spent the entire evening making backhanded comments about Allison's background. Her father was a carpenter. Her career aspirations, teaching high school instead of something prestigious. And her appearance too thin, not feminine enough, terrible posture. "She's not right for you," Gertrude had told Norman later, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're settling. You could do so much better." But Norman loved Allison, and they built a life together. When Emma was born, Norman thought maybe Gertrude would soften. Instead, she became worse. The comments started subtly. "Are you sure she's yours? She doesn't look like you." Then, more directly, "Allison seems awfully friendly with that neighbor." And finally, the accusations. "I saw her with another man. I'm just trying to protect you." Norman hadn't believed her. He'd trusted Allison completely, but Gertrude was patient and methodical. Over the course of 2 years, she'd orchestrated an elaborate deception. Fake receipts from hotels, a burner phone with fabricated text messages, planted in Allison's gym bag, photos, expertly manipulated to show Allison with another man, actually her cousin from out of state, but Gertrude had cropped out identifying details. The final piece was Gertrude hiring someone to pose as Allison's lover and approach Norman at a restaurant, loudly thanking him for sharing his wife. The humiliation had been public and devastating. Allison had been blindsided. She protested her innocence, shown Norman photos of her cousin, explained every receipt and message. But Gertrude had been thorough, and Norman, overwhelmed and confused, had faltered. He hadn't divorced Allison, but the trust was fractured. They'd separated, with Norman moving into an apartment while they figured things out. 3 months later, Allison drove her car off a bridge during a rainstorm. The police ruled that an accident visibility was poor. The road was slick, but Norman knew better. He'd found her journal afterward, entries describing her despair at losing Norman's trust, at being accused of something she'd never done, at the helplessness of being unable to prove her innocence. Her last entry, dated the day before she died. "Gertrude wins. I can't fight someone who doesn't play fair. Norman, if you ever read this, know that I loved you, and Emma more than my own life. I never betrayed you. Never. The doorbell rang. Yanking Norman back to the present, Emma leaped off the couch and ran to the door. They're here. Norman composed himself and opened the door. Douglas stood there, tall and apologetic, with Gertrude beside him. His mother was 72, thin and severe, with gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a navy dress and pearl earrings, the picture of respectable propriety. "Happy birthday, Emma," Douglas said warmly, handing her a wrapped present. Emma hugged him, beaming. Gertrude brushed past Norman without greeting him and surveyed the apartment with barely concealed disdain. "Still living in this place," she remarked. "You'd think with your salary you could afford something better." "For Emma's sake. It's home," Norman said evenly. "Emma, why don't you show Uncle Douglas the decorations you helped make?" As Emma dragged Douglas toward the kitchen, Gertrude settled onto the couch like a queen on a throne. "I assume you'll be serving real food and not just cake?" "There's pizza coming," Norman said. "Emma's favorite." "Pizza?" Gertrude's lip curled. "Well, I suppose we can't expect much. You're raising her alone, after all. No mother to teach her proper things." Norman's hands clenched at his sides, but he said nothing. Not yet. Other guests began arriving, Emma's friends from school, their parents, a few neighbors. The apartment filled with noise and laughter, children running around with paper crowns and party favors. Norman had hired a magician for entertainment, and Emma's delighted squeals as the man pulled a rabbit from his hat made all the preparation worthwhile. Douglas pulled Norman aside during the magic show. "She's been awful all morning," he whispered, "talking about how you've wasted your life and how Emma is growing up damaged without a proper family structure. I try to shut her down, but you know how she is." "I know exactly how she is," Norman said quietly. "More than you realize." Douglas studied his brother's face. "Norman, what's going on?" "You'll see. Soon." After the magic show, Norman brought out the cake, a purple unicorn creation that Emma had specifically requested. The kids sang. Emma blew out the candles, and for a moment, everything was perfect. Then, it was time for presents. Emma opened gifts from her friends, dolls, books, art supplies. She was gracious with each one, thanking everyone. When she reached Gertrude's gift, the atmosphere shifted. Gertrude hadn't wrapped it. She simply held out a crumpled $10 bill. "Here," Gertrude said loudly, as the room fell silent. "Take this." Emma reached for it, confused. Gertrude pulled it back slightly, making Emma lean forward. Then, with deliberate cruelty, Gertrude tossed the bill at Emma's face. It hit her cheek and fluttered to the floor. "You're another man's mistake," Gertrude announced, her voice carrying across the room. "You're a bastard child from your mother's cheating. That's why she's dead. She couldn't live with the shame of what she'd done." The room went silent. Emma stood frozen, the $10 bill at her feet, her face crumpling as she processed the words. Parents began ushering their children toward the door. Embarrassed and uncomfortable, Douglas stepped forward, furious, but Norman held up a hand. Emma looked at Norman, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy?" Norman remained silent for a long moment, letting Gertrude think she'd won. She sat on the couch, a satisfied smirk on her face, basking in the destruction she'd caused. Then Norman walked to his bedroom and retrieved the manila envelope. He returned and knelt beside Emma, wiping her tears. "Sweetheart, go to your room for a few minutes. Uncle Douglas." "Take her." Douglas gently guided the sobbing Emma away. The few remaining guests excused themselves quickly, leaving only Norman, Gertrude, and Douglas, who returned after settling Emma. Norman stood in front of his mother, the envelope in his hands. "I've been waiting for this," he said quietly. "Waiting for you to go too far, to show everyone exactly what you are. And you just did." Gertrude waved dismissively. "Oh, spare me the dramatics. That child needed to know the truth about her whore mother." "Open it," Norman said, handing her the envelope. "What is this?" Gertrude asked, but her hands trembled slightly as she took it. "Everything," Norman said. "Everything you've done." Gertrude opened the envelope and pulled out the first document. Her face, so smug moments before, began to change. Color drained from her cheeks. Her hands shook harder. That's the receipt from the printing shop where you had fake hotel invoices created, Norman said, his voice steady and cold. The proprietor, Marvin Collier, kept records. I found him. He remembered you said you were very specific about making them look authentic. Gertrude flipped to the next page. That's the bank statement showing payments to Peter Wall, the private investigator you hired. Not to investigate Allison, to help you manufacture evidence against her. Peter felt guilty after Allison died. He kept copies of everything, and when I approached him last year, he gave them all to me. Douglas stepped closer, reading over Gertrude's shoulder. Mom, what the hell? And that, Norman continued, pointing to a photo in the stack, is you meeting with Simon Garner, the actor you paid to approach me at that restaurant and claim he was sleeping with Allison. Simon's career didn't pan out, and he's been working as a bartender for the past 3 years. He was very willing to write out a full confession when I explained that he might be considered an accessory to fraud and harassment. Gertrude's face had gone from pale to gray. She looked like she might vomit. There's more, Norman said. Text messages from your phone to these people, coordinating the scheme. Receipts for the burner phone you planted in Allison's gym bag. A sworn affidavit from Allison's cousin, Joel Adkins, confirming that you manipulated photos of him with Allison to make them look suspicious. Even the photo editing software you purchased is documented you weren't as careful as you thought. Norman, Gertrude whispered, but he cut her off. Allison died believing she'd lost everything because of lies you manufactured. She drove off that bridge because you destroyed her life, her marriage, her reputation. You killed her as surely as if you'd pushed her yourself. Douglas sank onto a chair, staring at their mother in horror. You did this? You destroyed Norman's marriage? You drove Allison to suicide? She wasn't good enough for him. Gertrude suddenly shouted, finding her voice. She was weak, common, beneath our family. I did what was necessary. You murdered her, Norman said flatly, and you traumatized your granddaughter. The question is, what happens now? Gertrude looked between her sons, calculation returning to her eyes. You can't prove anything. These documents don't prove intent. No prosecutor would take this case. It's been 3 years. You're right. Norman interrupted. Legally, this is a gray area. Fraud, harassment, maybe some civil charges, but criminal prosecution would be difficult. Allison's death was ruled an accident, so I won't be going to the police. Gertrude relaxed slightly. Then what do you want? Money? I can. I don't want your money, Norman said. I want justice, and I'm going to get it my way. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. You see, Mom, I've spent 3 years not just gathering evidence of what you did to Allison. I've been investigating your entire life, and you've been a busy woman. Norman pulled another folder from his bag, this one much thicker. Did you know that embezzling from your church's charity fund is actually prosecutable? Especially when it totals over $40,000 across 5 years. I found the accounts, the fake receipts you submitted. Everything. Gertrude's eyes widened. And then there's the insurance fraud. You claimed your jewelry was stolen in a home burglary 8 years ago, collected $75,000. But the jewelry was never stolen. You sold it privately and pocketed both the insurance money and the sale proceeds. I found the buyer, got the receipts, the whole trail. You're lying, Gertrude said, but her voice was weak. There's also the matter of Dad's will, Norman continued, watching his mother's face. When Dad died 10 years ago, he left his estate split equally between you, me, and Douglas. But somehow, you ended up with everything. I had the will re-examined by a forensic document examiner. The signature on the revised will is a forgery. You cheated us out of our inheritance. Douglas stood up. She what? Dad's original will is on file with his attorney, Arthur Stone. The revised will, the one that left everything to Mom, was filed 3 days after Dad died, supposedly signed just hours before his death. But Dad was unconscious those final hours. The nurse's logs prove he couldn't have signed anything. You forged it. Gertrude's gray face had turned almost white. So, here's what's going to happen, Norman said, his voice hard as steel. You have 2 choices. Choice 1. I take all of this, the evidence of what you did to Allison, the embezzlement, the insurance fraud, the will forgery, and I go to the police, the district attorney, your church, and every person in your social circle. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. You'll face criminal charges, civil lawsuits from Douglas and me, and complete social destruction. At your age, you'd likely die in prison." Gertrude was shaking now, her carefully constructed world crumbling. "Choice 2. Norman continued. "You disappear from our lives, completely and permanently. You sign over Dad's estate to Douglas and me, as it should have been divided. You repay the church fund and the insurance money. And you never contact me, Emma, or Douglas again. You don't call, don't write, don't show up anywhere we are. You become dead to us." "You can't," Gertrude started. "I can, and I will," Norman said. "You have until Monday to decide. If I don't have signed documents transferring Dad's assets and written agreements to repay what you stole, I'll be at the police station Tuesday morning with everything." "And Mom?" He leaned closer. "I really hope you choose wrong. Because after what you did to Allison, after what you just did to Emma, I would love nothing more than to watch you rot in a cell." Douglas found his voice. "I support whatever Norman decides. Mom, you're a monster. I always made excuses for you, thought you were just difficult, but this..." He gestured at the documents. "This is evil." Gertrude looked between her sons, seeing no mercy in either face. "My own children. Your own son's wife," Norman cut her off. "Your own granddaughter. You showed no mercy to them. You get exactly what you gave." Norman called a car service for Gertrude. As she gathered her purse with shaking hands, he added one final thing. "And if you're thinking about fighting this, about trying to claim these documents are fabricated, or that I'm lying, remember, I'm a chemical engineer with a PhD. I know exactly how to document evidence properly. I've had every piece of this verified by experts. You will lose." Gertrude left without another word, her proud posture broken, looking every one of her 72 years. After she was gone, Douglas turned to Norman. "You really spent 3 years investigating all of this." "I spent 2 years grieving and blaming myself," Norman said quietly. "Then I found Allison's journal. She kept track of everything, every weird incident, every manufactured piece of evidence. She'd figured out it was Mom, but had no proof. So I got the proof. For her. And for Emma." Douglas embraced his brother. "I'm sorry. I should have seen it, should have protected you both. You didn't know. Mom was careful. She always has been. What will you tell Emma?" Norman was quiet for a moment. "The truth. Age appropriately. But the truth. That her mother loved her. That the things Grandma said were lies. And that some people are just bad even when they're family." He paused. "I'll also tell her that her mother was a hero who fought against lies, and that being kind and truthful like Allison was is the best way to honor her memory. She'll understand. Emma's smart, like Allison was." They found Emma in her room, curled up with a stuffed elephant. Norman sat beside her, gathering her into his arms. "Is what Grandma said true?" Emma asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart. Your mother never cheated. She loved me, and you more than anything in the world. Grandma was lying because she's a very sick, sad person who wanted to hurt people." "Why?" "It was the hardest question. I don't know," Norman admitted. "Some people are just broken inside. But what matters is this. You are my daughter. You are wanted and loved, and your mother was a wonderful woman. Grandma will never hurt you again because she's not going to be in our lives anymore. Never? Never." Emma processed this, then asked, "Can we still have cake?" Norman laughed, the tension breaking. "Absolutely. Let's have cake." Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Norman was at work, running tests on a new compound formulation, when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? It's me." Gertrude's voice, diminished and bitter. "I have the documents. Where should I send them?" "My attorney's office." Norman provided the address. "And the repayment arrangements?" "I've set up payment plans with the church and the insurance company. Anonymous repayment with interest." She paused. "You've destroyed my life." "No," Norman said calmly. "You destroyed your own life. You destroyed Allison's life. You nearly destroyed mine and Emma's. I just made sure there were consequences." "I'm your mother." "You were my mother," Norman corrected. "Now you're just someone who's finally facing justice. Goodbye, Gertrude." He hung up before she could respond. The documents arrived at the attorney's office by noon. Douglas met Norman there to review everything. The estate division was straightforward. Their father had left a modest house and some investments, which should have been split between Gertrude and her two sons. Now, Gertrude was signing over her portion plus Norman and Douglas's original shares. With their father's property values having appreciated over the decade, it was substantial. "What will you do with your portion?" Douglas asked, as they signed the final papers. "Set up a trust fund for Emma," Norman said, "for college, for her future, and maybe take her on a trip somewhere. She's been through enough, she deserves some joy." "You're a good father," Douglas said. "Allison would be proud of how you've handled this. I should have believed her from the start." Mom was convincing. She'd spent 2 years building an airtight case. "Don't beat yourself up." But Norman would carry that guilt for the rest of his life. The knowledge that he'd doubted Allison, even momentarily, even while being manipulated. It didn't matter that Gertrude had been thorough and calculating. He should have trusted the woman he loved. The repayment confirmations came through later that week. The church received a cashier's check for $43,000 with a note claiming it was an anonymous donation to correct past accounting errors. The insurance company received $80,000, the original claim plus interest, with similar documentation. Gertrude was keeping her word, probably terrified that Norman would expose her anyway. He wouldn't, not because she deserved mercy, but because Emma deserved peace. The criminal exposure would mean trials, media attention, and Emma's trauma being made public. Norman wanted his daughter to heal, not to be defined by what Gertrude had done. But he kept the evidence, just in case Gertrude ever broke their agreement. 3 months later, Norman stood at Allison's grave with Emma. They came every few weeks, and Norman had started being more honest about what had happened. Emma was 7 young, but old enough for truth, carefully told. "Mommy was really good," Emma said, placing flowers on the grave marker. "Right, Daddy?" "The best," Norman confirmed. "She fought very hard for what was right, even when it was difficult." "Grandma was bad." "Grandma made very bad choices," Norman clarified. "She hurt people on purpose. That's different from making mistakes." Emma considered this. "Will I ever see her again?" "No. And that's okay. We choose our family by who loves us and treats us well, not just by who's related to us." "Like Uncle Douglas?" "Exactly like Uncle Douglas." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the spring breeze carrying the scent of fresh flowers and cut grass. Norman thought about forgiveness, about justice, about the line between the two. He didn't forgive Gertrude, and he never would. But he found something better than forgiveness. He'd found resolution. The truth was documented. The guilty party had faced consequences, and Emma was safe. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Emma announced, pulling him from his thoughts. "Pizza," Norman suggested. Emma's face lit up. "With extra cheese?" "Obviously, with extra cheese." As they walked back to the car, Emma slipped her small hand into his. "I'm glad you're my daddy," she said, "even if Grandma was mean about it." Norman's throat tightened. "I'm glad I'm your daddy too. Best job I've ever had." "Better than making medicines?" "Infinitely better." 6 months after the birthday confrontation, Norman's life had found a new equilibrium. Work was steady. Emma was thriving in 2nd grade, and Douglas had become a regular presence in their lives, coming over for dinner at least twice a week. Norman had started seeing a therapist, working through the grief and guilt that still surfaced. The therapist, a kind woman named Marcia McCullough, had helped him understand that being manipulated wasn't the same as being weak, and that his doubt of Allison had been the intended result of Gertrude's calculated campaign. "Your mother is a narcissist with sociopathic tendencies," Marcia had explained in one session. She used classic manipulation techniques, gaslighting, creating false evidence, isolating her target. These are methods that work on intelligent, trusting people precisely because they assume others operate with the same basic honesty they do. You're not a fool for falling for it. You're a decent person who encountered someone indecent. It helped somewhat. Norman still wished he'd seen through it faster, fought harder for Allison, but he was learning to forgive himself, even if he couldn't forgive Gertrude. Emma was doing better too. She'd had a few sessions with a child psychologist who'd helped her process what happened at the birthday party. Norman had been honest with her in age-appropriate terms. Grandma told lies to hurt people. She said mean things that weren't true. She's not in our lives anymore. because people who are mean on purpose don't get to be around people who are kind. Emma had accepted this with a remarkable resilience of children. She still had nightmares sometimes, but they were becoming less frequent. At work, Norman had been promoted to lead a new research team. His boss, a sharp-eyed woman named Lucinda Gray, had called him into her office one morning. "Sawyer, you've been distracted for the past few years," she'd said bluntly. "But in the last 6 months, you've been on fire. Whatever personal issues you were dealing with, I'm glad you've resolved them. The work you've been producing is exceptional. I'm putting you on the new cardiac medication project. Big team, bigger budget, chance to do something that actually changes lives." Norman had accepted gratefully. It felt like a new chapter, like he was finally moving forward instead of being trapped in the past. A year after the birthday party, Norman received a letter. It wasn't from Gertrude. She kept her word about the no-contact agreement, but from someone unexpected, Peter Wall, the private investigator Gertrude had hired. Norman opened it carefully, unsure what to expect. "Dear Mr. Sawyer, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to reach out to tell you something I should have said when we met last year. Your mother's scheme was one of the most elaborate and cruel things I've ever been part of, and I've been in this business for 30 years. I should have refused the job. I should have warned you. Instead, I took the money and helped destroy your marriage. After your wife's death, I couldn't sleep. I started drinking heavily. I knew what I'd been part of, and it ate at me. When you approached me with questions, I saw it as a chance for redemption. I gave you everything I had, but it wasn't enough to bring Mrs. Sawyer back. I'm writing because I want you to know I've left the private investigation business. I'm working with a nonprofit now that helps domestic abuse victims document their cases properly. It's my way of trying to balance the scales after what I did to your family. I also want you to know that your mother contacted me 6 months ago, trying to hire me again. She wanted me to find leverage against you. I refused and reported her attempt to your attorney. She's been quiet since then, but I thought you should know she's still trying to find ways to hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what happened to your wife mattered, that it changed someone, and that I'm trying to make sure I never help destroy another innocent person's life. Peter Wall. Norman read the letter twice, processing the information. Gertrude had tried to hire Peter again, tried to find new ways to attack him. It confirmed everything he believed about his mother. She wasn't remorseful, just cornered. He called his attorney, Lucas Brighton, and relayed the information. "Do you want to pursue legal action?" Lucas asked. "This could be considered harassment, violation of your agreement." Norman thought about it. "No, but document it. Add it to the file. If she tries anything else, I want a pattern established." "Smart. I'll send her attorney a warning letter. Nothing specific, just a reminder that the no-contact agreement is legally binding and that violations will have consequences." "Thanks, Lucas." Norman filed the letter with his other documentation. Gertrude's attempt to hire Peter was telling she couldn't let go, couldn't accept that she'd lost. But she was also cautious enough not to violate the agreement directly. She was looking for loopholes, for ways to hurt Norman without exposing herself to the consequences he'd outlined. Let her try, Norman thought. He was ready. He'd spent 3 years building an airtight case against her. If she wanted to add new charges to that list, he'd accommodate her. Emma's 8th birthday was everything the 7th hadn't been. Norman rented a pavilion at a local park, hired a face painter and a balloon artist, and invited everyone important in their lives. Douglas brought his fiancée, a warm and funny woman named June Burgess who'd become a surrogate aunt to Emma. Norman's research team came, his neighbors, Emma's entire class from school, and even Marcia McCullough stopped by with a gift. The day was perfect, sunny, warm, filled with laughter. Emma wore a sparkly crown and ran around with her friends, her face painted like a butterfly. Norman watched her from the food table, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "She's doing well," Douglas said, appearing beside him with a plate of potato salad. "You both are." "We're getting there," Norman agreed. "Some days are harder than others, but yeah, we're getting there. Have you heard from Mom at all?" "No." "You?" "Not a word. I think she's finally accepted that we're done." Norman wasn't so sure the letter from Peter suggested otherwise, but he didn't want to worry Douglas on such a good day. "Maybe." June joined them, linking her arm through Douglas's. "This is a great party. You did good, Norman." "Thanks. It's what Emma deserved last year." "That woman. June said she'd been told the full story. I hope she's miserable wherever she is. I hope she's learning, Norman said quietly. I hope somewhere in that cold heart of hers, she recognizes what she did and feels something resembling remorse. But honestly, I don't care anymore. She's a closed chapter. To close chapters, Douglas raised his soda cup. They toasted, and Emma ran over demanding that all the adults join in a game of musical chairs. Norman let himself be dragged into the chaos, into the joy of the moment, into the life he was rebuilding piece by piece. Later, after cake and presents and exhausted goodbyes, Norman and Emma walked to the car. She was carrying a stuffed dragon from her friends and wearing her crown at a crooked angle. "Best birthday ever," she declared. "Better than last year?" Norman asked gently. Emma was quiet for a moment, thoughtful in the way children sometimes are when they're processing big ideas. "Last year was when we learned who to keep in our lives," she finally said. "This year is us being happy with the right people." Norman stopped walking and knelt down to her level. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm 8 now," Emma said seriously. "That's very mature." Norman laughed and hugged her tightly. "Yes, you're very mature. Come on, kiddo. Let's go home." As he drove home, Emma chattering about her day in the back seat, Norman thought about justice and revenge. He'd spent years planning his confrontation with Gertrude, years gathering evidence and waiting for the perfect moment. The revenge had been satisfying, watching her face drain of color, stripping away her carefully constructed respectability, banishing her from their lives. But the real victory was this: Emma's laughter, the peace in his own heart, the ability to move forward. Gertrude was gone, probably stewing in bitterness somewhere, and Norman barely thought about her anymore. She'd lost everything that mattered: her family, her reputation in his eyes, her control, and all Norman had lost was someone who'd only ever brought pain. In the end, it wasn't even close. He'd won completely. 2 years after the birthday party confrontation, Norman's life had transformed entirely. The cardiac medication his team had developed entered clinical trials, showing promising results. Emma was 9 years old, confident and bright, with Allison's kindness and Norman's analytical mind. Douglas and June had married, and June was pregnant with their first child. Norman had even started dating again carefully, slowly, with someone he'd met through work. Her name was Rose Goldberg. She worked in the company's legal department, and she understood about Allison, about the past, about why Norman moved cautiously. They'd been seeing each other for 6 months, and Emma adored her. One Saturday morning, Norman's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Sawyer, this is Springfield Memorial Hospital. You're listed as next of kin for Gertrude Sawyer." Norman's blood ran cold. "I'm her son, but we're not in contact." "What's happened?" "She's had a severe stroke. She's stable but unable to communicate. We need family here to make medical decisions." Norman closed his eyes. Of course. Even now, even after everything, she found a way to intrude. "I'll be there in an hour. But I need to make something clear: I'm making decisions based on what medical professionals recommend, not on what she might want. We are not close." "Understood, sir." Norman called Douglas, explained the situation, and they met at the hospital. Gertrude looked small and frail in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding her. The left side of her face drooped, and her eyes, while open, were unfocused. The doctor explained the situation: major stroke, significant brain damage, uncertain prognosis. She might recover some function with therapy, or she might not. The next few days would tell. "Does she have a living will? Healthcare directive?" the doctor asked. "I'll need to check her documents," Norman said. "Can you give me access to her personal effects?" In Gertrude's purse, they found keys to her apartment. Norman and Douglas drove their small, neat place that looked exactly like Gertrude: cold, orderly, joyless. They found the legal documents in a filing cabinet. Gertrude had a living will that specified no extraordinary measures if she were to become incapacitated with no reasonable chance of recovery. She'd also left a will dividing her remaining assets between a few charities and cousins, pointedly excluding Norman and Douglas. "She never let go of the hate," Douglas said quietly, reading the will. "No," Norman agreed. "But it doesn't matter anymore." They also found something else: Journals. Dozens of them, going back decades. Norman shouldn't have read them, but he needed to understand. He needed to know if there was any remorse, any recognition of what she'd done. There wasn't. The journals were filled with justifications, with elaborate explanations of why everyone else was wrong, why her actions were necessary. There were pages about Allison, calling her manipulative, claiming she'd tricked Norman, insisting she'd been doing Norman a favor by exposing the truth. There were also disturbing entries about other people Gertrude had heard over the years, neighbors, friends, even her own husband. Norman's father had apparently wanted a divorce shortly before his death, had discovered Gertrude's theft of church funds, and confronted her about it. The journal entries suggested she'd increased his pain medication without authorization in his final weeks, ensuring he'd be too incoherent to follow through with the divorce or reports to authorities. She'd probably killed him. Norman showed Douglas the relevant pages. His brother's face went from shock to fury to grief. She murdered Dad? Probably. We'll never prove it now, but yeah. I think she did. Douglas sat down heavily. What do? We follow her living will, Norman said. We authorize comfort care only, and then we walk away. We don't visit, we don't vigil, we don't mourn. We let her face the end the way she made others face their suffering alone. It was harsh, perhaps, but it was also just. They returned to the hospital and spoke with the ethics team and doctors. Given Gertrude's living will and the extent of her brain damage, the recommendation was comfort care. She'd be kept comfortable, but no aggressive treatment would be pursued. If she recovered some function naturally, fine. If not, nature would take its course. Norman and Douglas signed the authorizations and left. They didn't look back. Gertrude Sawyer died 6 days later. The hospital called. Norman acknowledged the information and authorized cremation. There was no funeral, no service, no obituary. Douglas and Norman signed the final papers, collected her ashes, which they scattered in an unmarked location, and settled her small estate. Emma asked about it when she noticed Norman had been quiet for a few days. Grandma Gertrude died, Norman told her gently. Emma was quiet, processing. Are you sad? Norman considered lying, decided against it. No. I'm sorry that she lived a life full of cruelty and died without ever understanding the damage she caused. I'm sorry she never learned to love people properly. But I'm not sad she's gone. Does that make me a bad person? No, Emma said firmly. She was mean. You don't have to be sad about mean people. I think there's probably a middle ground where we should be compassionate even for people who hurt us, Norman said carefully. But I also think it's okay to feel relief when someone who caused a lot of pain isn't able to cause pain anymore. Did she hurt Mommy? Yes, very much. Then I'm glad she's gone too, Emma said. Is that okay? It's okay to feel however you feel, Norman assured her. The important thing is that we don't become like her. We don't hurt people on purpose. We don't lie or manipulate. We stay kind, even when it's hard. That's how we honor your mom's memory. Emma hugged him tightly. We're good people, right, Daddy? We're trying our best to be, Norman said. And that's all anyone can do. 3 years after the birthday party, Norman and Rose got married in a small ceremony with only close friends and family. Emma was the flower girl, beaming in a lavender dress. Douglas's son, now 2 years old, was the ring bearer, though he mostly just tried to eat the rings until June intervened. The ceremony was held in the same park where Emma's 8th birthday had been, under a pavilion decorated with white flowers and soft lights. The judge who performed the ceremony was a friend of Rose's family, and he kept it brief and heartfelt. When Norman said his vows, he thought about Allison, not with guilt or sadness, but with gratitude. She taught him what real love looked like. Selfless, honest, enduring. She'd shown him how to be a good parent, how to stand up for what was right even when it cost you. And in some strange way, the tragedy of her death had forced Norman to become the person he needed to be strong enough to fight for truth, brave enough to face difficult realities, smart enough to build an ironclad case against his mother. Rose understood all of this. She'd never tried to replace Allison or erase her memory. Instead, she'd made space for Allison in their lives. Emma's room had photos of Allison, they visited the grave together, and Rose often said things like, "Your mom would be proud of you," when Emma accomplished something. At the reception, Douglas gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. "To my brother," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that family isn't about blood, It's about choosing to show up with love again and again, even when things are hard. Norman, you're the best man I know. Rose, you're joining a team that's already pretty great, but you make them even better. To the happy couple, Emma gave her own toast, reading carefully from a card she'd written. I'm happy Rose is going to be my stepmom because she's really nice and she makes my dad smile a lot. Also, she lets me stay up late sometimes. Thank you for loving us. It was perfect. Later, as the party wound down and Emma fell asleep on a bench with her head on June's lap, Norman and Rose stood at the edge of the pavilion, watching the sunset. You know what I realized? Rose said quietly. I never asked what was in that envelope. The one from the birthday party. Everything. Norman said simply. Every lie my mother told. Every person she'd hurt. Every crime she'd committed. 3 years of investigation compressed into incontrovertible proof. And you waited for the perfect moment. I waited for the moment when she'd hurt Emma. When I could show her exactly what her cruelty led to. When I could strip away every bit of power she thought she had. Rose was quiet for a moment. Do you regret not turning her into the police? Sometimes, Norman admitted. But no. Emma's peace was more important than my desire to see Gertrude in handcuffs. This way, Gertrude lost everything that mattered: her family, her control, her ability to hurt us, and Emma got to heal without being dragged through legal proceedings. You're a good father, Rose said. I'm trying to be the father Allison would have wanted Emma to have, Norman said. Every day, I think about what she'd want for Emma, and I try to do that. Sometimes I fail, but I keep trying. That's all any of us can do. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Behind them, their family chosen and blood, old and new, celebrated and laughed and created new memories that would push the old pain further into the past. Gertrude was gone. Allison was gone. But Emma was here, thriving. Douglas had built a family. Norman had found love again. And the evidence of everything that had happened was locked in a safety deposit box. A reminder and a warning, but not a burden. The past was documented, understood, and resolved. The future was open, uncertain, but filled with people who'd chosen to love each other honestly. And that, Norman thought as Emma stirred awake and called for him, was justice. Not revenge, not punishment, but the construction of something good from the ruins of something terrible. It was the victory of truth over lies, of kindness over cruelty, of chosen family over toxic blood relations. It was enough. Emma ran to him, still half asleep, and he scooped her up. She was getting too big for this, almost too heavy, but he'd carry her as long as she let him. Did I miss the sunset? She mumbled against his shoulder. No, sweetheart. You can still see it. Emma lifted her head, looked at the darkening sky streaked with the last rays of light, and smiled. It's pretty. Yeah, Norman agreed, holding his daughter close, his wife beside him, his brother and family nearby. It really is. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.